Well, thank you, everyone. So Trav is going to be our speaker, Dr. Trav Williams, and he's going to tell us about his talk.
Okay, thank you. You're actually one of the first people to refer to me as doctor.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just about a week and a half ago that it was officially conferred, and it was a 5-year process that, oh, thank you, Joelle. I was hoping it would be done in 3 to 4 years, but you know, these things sometimes take longer. So my doctorate, it's a PhD in business management, and the topic that I ended up choosing for my dissertation was diversity in the tech industry. So it's obviously something that's very important for us as Baha'is. Let's see. Let me see if I. It looks like I'll have to be given
Yeah, I'm going
permission
to
to share. And I'll share my presentation. It does have an interactive component because I've learned to try to engage when I speak and not just be a talking head. And there is going to be space for discussion. How long should we allocate?
45 minutes.
Okay, that's plenty of time.
And then half hour of discussions.
Very good. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and share. Hopefully, can everybody see this okay and hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
You can see it.
Okay, well, so this presentation I put together just recently. Again, it draws from my dissertation, but it incorporates the Baha'i teachings as well. And the title is The Role of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Society. You might have heard that term. In fact, sometimes it's just referred to as DEI. And it's a very, very common term in the business world and in academia, and now in politics, because interestingly, it's become controversial to support diversity, equity, and inclusion, things that growing up as a Baha'i, I always thought was just second nature, but now I'm learning that it's politically controversial. So in this topic, we'll look at the roles that diversity, equity, and inclusion play in society, the definitions of these terms and why they're important, as well as what we can do in our own lives to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion. So here is the first part of a quote from Abdul Baha. And can I ask for somebody to volunteer to read both this slide and the next slide?
I can read.
Thank you.
What roles do diversity, equity, and inclusion play in society? The body politic may be likened to the human organism. As long as the various members and parts of that organism are coordinated and cooperating in harmony, we have, as a result, the expression of life in its fullest degree. When these members lack coordination and harmony, we have the reverse, which in the human organism is disease, dissolution, death. Similarly, in the body politic of humanity, dissension, discord, and warfare are always destructive and inevitably fatal. All created beings are dependent upon peace and coordination, for every contingent and phenomenal being is a composition of distinct elements.
And if you don't mind, please continue, Quanta.
Yes, as long as there is affinity and cohesion among these constituent elements, strength and life are manifest. But when dissension and repulsion arise amongst them, disintegration follows. This is proof that peace and amity, which God has willed for his children, are the saving factors of human society, whereas war and strife which violate his ordinances are the cause of death and destruction. Therefore, God has sent his prophets to announce the message of goodwill, peace, and life to the world of mankind. Abdul Baha, Promulgation of Universal Peace.
Wonderful. Thank you for reading that so clearly. So I chose this quote because Abdul Baha very, very clearly explains the relationship of diversity to the human body, but also to humanity, right? Society is made up of different parts, just like the human body is. And these parts have to work together in harmony in order to have a healthy living being. In the same way, we need a diverse society in order to be healthy. If everybody were the same, we would lack certain creativity and skills and talents, and even challenges that come from having diversity. So let's look at what these words mean. Diversity, yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept. Here's a definition that comes from Oxford. I found it on Google, and it's people from a range of of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, etc. Now, to me, the most important term, the most important word in this definition is etc. Because when we hear diversity, we probably first think of ethnicity, and then maybe we think of gender, just because of the way we've been socialized here in the United States. But really, diversity has so many different ways it can be applied to any group of people. And I'll talk a little bit more about that based on my study. So diversity, again, is differences, right? Then equity is defined as being fair and impartial. Now, it sounds like equality, but they're not exactly the same. And the image down at the bottom of the screen shows a difference. If equality is everybody gets an apple, equity is everybody gets an apple they can reach. So the difference is that it's not just the same opportunity, but really the same access, that some people might need additional support for whatever reason in order for them to get what they are entitled to. So equity goes really beyond equality to ensure access really for everybody. And now how, what exactly that means and how you provide that access, that's a whole discussion by itself. And then inclusion is including within a group or structure. So diversity and equity inclusion means creating a situation where you have diversity of all different types of people. There's equity, meaning those who need more support or more assistance receive that. And inclusion, which is critical, means that everybody feels included. So it's not just that the group is diverse, right? It's not just that you have an arm and a leg, but inclusion means that they're working together. They accept one another. They value one another. Any comments or questions here on these, these terms or definitions? Okay, so let's proceed then. I'll tell you a little bit about the study that I conducted. Here's the title of the study: Female Technology Managers, Perceptions of Diversity Hiring. So I had to go out and recruit women that were in information technology or biotechnology, and that were in management positions. Most of them were director level or above. And I interviewed 12 of these women and had 3 research questions. So the first question that I asked them was, which personal attributes should be diverse. So in hiring employees, when they think about diversity, what does that mean? And what do they value in terms of having diversity in the workplace? And of course, they all said race or ethnicity, and they all said gender, that diversity in those areas was important. But what I found very interesting was they came up with 28 other types of diversity. And there were so many that I categorized them into 5 categories. In fact, in the next slide here, I break it down. So the first category was diversity of background. So they valued that employees had different personal experiences, different cultures, they came from different countries, different types of upbringings, and different levels of privilege. So, for example, in the United States, those of us who are, classified as white, we have a certain privilege that, we might not even be aware of, and other people do not have that privilege. And so having diversity of people, some with more and less privilege, they recognized as something valuable. Of course, privilege is something that once you're aware of, you should take action and not just accept that privilege, but try to figure out, okay, well, if society is giving me this privilege, how do I use it to provide equity to others? So this was the first category, is diverse backgrounds. They also brought up different types of intellectual diversity, so different beliefs, perspectives, priorities, communication styles, which I'll come back to, education levels, languages, religion, which I opted to classify as intellectual, although we know there's obviously a spiritual component to religion, and diversity of social skills. Now, this communication style is something I find very interesting. I notice in groups of people, when there's communication, there are different communication styles, and you have some people that will talk over others, and that's normal as part of their either personality or culture, that they're perfectly comfortable interrupting and being interrupted. And you've got other people at the opposite end of the spectrum who won't say anything until they've been asked to speak, or maybe there's been a long silence of maybe 30 seconds. And if we're not aware of those different communication styles, you tend to hear more from certain voices and not from others. So I think that's one example of how just being aware of diversity, but also including everybody by making sure every voice is heard, helps us as groups to communicate. The next category was personal diversity. So this had to do with where people lived, their personalities, the schools that they had attended, their marital status, and their parental status. Were they a parent? Were they single with children? Were they, whatever, maybe an older person whose children were now adults, that this sort of diversity was valuable. And even how people dressed, they found it was, if everybody came to work dressed somewhat uniformly, that had a negative impact, that there was some value to diversity in dress. The next category that they brought up, again, included race and gender, and that was physical types of diversity. Now, I put race in quotation marks because anthropologists have said there's only one race. There are not distinct races within humanity, but we use this term really to talk about different ethnic groups. And so it is very common in our society to talk about racial diversity. So this was viewed as being very important. Interestingly, the participants in the study talked about gender. They really didn't talk about biological sex. They talked more about gender, and the difference being how people identify as male or as a woman or a man as opposed to whether they're biologically male or female. They didn't seem concerned about biological differences, but they were concerned about diversity of gender. Also ability, those who maybe have disabilities, quote unquote, versus those who don't. Diversity of age, LGBT status, obviously meaning lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender status, and body type, whether people are heavy, thin, tall, short. Diversity in that area was important in their eyes. And the last category, since again this has to do with employees, was professional. But interestingly, there were only 4 examples in this category. Different industries that people came from, their job level within organizations, their credentials, and length of service, meaning had they been with their previous employers for long periods of time or shorter. So these were the 30 different types of diversity that these participants felt were important in the workplace. Are there any thoughts, questions, or comments on these different categories or types of diversity?
Well, it seems that they thought some kinds of diversity were more important than others. They weren't all equal on the same level.
Yes.
And mostly gender and race, I think.
Exactly.
Are the big ones.
Exactly.
Which are also those issues which are politically controversial. I mean, socially controversial, where you have, demonstrations and violence involved. I don't think politically most people are, there's any political issue with any of these other kinds of diversity. The kinds of clothes you wear and so on. So maybe race in particular and gender are the focus of the issue.
Right. And we know Shoghi Effendi said that, the racial issue, especially between the Black and white communities, is the most challenging issue for America. So obviously that is one that's, one that came to mind for all of these participants who were mostly not Baha'i, but they shared that sentiment.
Joel has her hand up.
Yes.
Yes, hi. I wanted to thank you for including the category of ability. I work in the field of disability accommodations and disability rights, and I go around and speak about it. And here in the state of Washington, we are very lucky and blessed that DEI is a part of our fabric. I work for the state of Washington, and it's not controversial. As a matter of fact, it's required. But every time I go to different meetings or organizations and they're talking about diversity and inclusion, the ability factor gets left out. And I'm always the one in the room going, hello, ability differences is one of the elements of intersectionality of inclusion. So for those who have different abilities, it's very, very, very important to be included in the room and in what we're doing. So I wanted to thank you for putting it in there, even though it was in the etc. category, but that was kind of cool.
Well, yes, and it really was the participants that brought up these aspects of diversity. In going through the transcripts of the interviews that I conducted, just made note of what they had brought up. So, not everybody, somewhere I have a tally of how many people mentioned each of these different types. And as Anthony mentioned, some were more prominent than others. But ability was definitely something brought up by at least a couple of them. And I should point out, it's not only physical ability, but it could be mental abilities or have to do with learning styles and so forth. So it's a whole topic of its own. So thank you, Joelle. So this was one question that I'd asked about. Another question I asked these participants was, in which jobs is diversity important? And they said every job in the organization. And by the way, these are all women in tech, right? Biotech appears to be fairly diverse and inclusive, but information technology as a field is not. It tends to be white male dominated. So it was great to hear these women who work in that industry saying, we need more diversity at every level of the organization. And especially, they said, in leadership. I heard this from many of them. And the reason they felt it was so important to have diversity in leadership is because those leaders model diversity, equity, and inclusion for others. And they're an example that you can have, well, I'll give you an example. My son works for a company that is owned by Amazon. It's a company that is developing autonomous vehicles, and it was started by a Black woman. I don't know if she was born in the United States or not. I think she might be African initially, but I think that's wonderful. But that's very rare in tech. So when you have people who represent these different groups in higher positions in information technology, it's helping to inspire others and to kind of shatter that that glass ceiling or some of the other ceilings that exist in that particular industry. The third thing I was curious about was in which situations is diversity important? For example, if your organization's growing, if your organization's shrinking, if it's buying another company, in which situations is diversity important? And again, they said uniformly, all situations. Diversity is always important in the view of these participants. So in my recent presentation, I shared a clip from the Lisa Ling program where she did about multicultural marriages. Some of you might have seen that. And there was about a 10-minute segment where she talked about the importance within the Baha'i faith of multicultural marriages, and how Abdu'l-Baha even recommended multicultural marriages. So I'm not going to show that here and now, but some of you might have seen that already. And it was a wonderful example of how the Baha'i faith has been promoting diversity, since Baha'u'llah's time, really, even the Bab's time. And you know what, before we go to general discussion, there's one other thing I'd like to share with everybody. If let's see, how are we on time?
We have 20 minutes.
Oh, good. Okay, let me share this one thing with you that's very interactive. I think I need to start sharing over, and then we'll just do open discussion. Oh, here we go. This is a quiz I put together for my students in the classes I teach on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think it might be fun. We'll skip some of the longer questions, but if we go through some of the shorter ones today. For example, let's start with this first question here. And the wording is very specific. Spanish as a language has more than 400 million native speakers, surpassed only by Mandarin Chinese as the language with the most native speakers. So what do you all think? Is that true or false?
I think that's true.
It is true. It is true.
The English probably has more speakers, but they're English as a second language.
Exactly, that's right. So now the second question here, the first university in the Americas was established in which country in 1551?
I'm going to guess Mexico.
Yeah, I was going to guess that too.
Okay, any other guesses? Peru.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Peru,
Really?
1551.
Wow.
Okay.
No kidding.
Spanish public schooling in Florida preceded English public schooling by 300 what?
In
Years?
Florida, you said?
Yeah. Did I hear
Years?
somebody say years? Yes. There were public schools started by the Spanish 300 years before the English
Wow.
in Florida.
Mhm.
Isn't that hard to just even fathom? 300 years sooner.
Public schools in parts of the United States came a couple of hundred years later.
Exactly.
Actually, I mean,
Exactly.
public schools were not available in southern states until after the Civil War. Actually.
Right, right. Which of these crops were cultivated by the peoples of Mesoamerica, roughly what we think of as Central America today?
All of them.
Yes, all of them.
Yeah, that's
And
that
I
would be
think,
my guess too.
yeah, I think they're all my favorite foods as well. So maybe I need to move to Central America. Okay, the next one's too easy. Here we go. Which of these inventions had their roots in Latin America?
Which are they?
Wow.
Their TV, contraceptive, gas, photography, ballpoint pen, artificial heart.
CAPTCHA codes, in case you don't know, that's when you go to a website and it has you type in some letters that it displays on the screen.
Oh,
That's a CAPTCHA code.
uh-huh.
So any guesses on this one?
Could be any of them.
I'll go with all of them.
Ballpoint pen.
Yeah,
Ballpoint
it
pen.
is all of the above.
Oh,
Really?
Photography had multiple inventors, but one of them was Latin American.
mhm.
Wow.
Okay, I'm going to skip this one.
Really interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, I try to make it interesting. Okay, how about this one? So of this group of 4 Black men, which of them also had a white parent?
All of them.
I know Obama was.
Yep,
Yes, of course.
all 4 of them, which I asked my students, why do we consider Barack Obama a Black president if he also had a white mother? You know, we wouldn't say he was a white president. Why is that? And obviously it has to do with our socialization.
It's a social construct of race.
Mhm.
Yes, race is a socially constructed category,
Exactly.
which has certain rules involved in the construction. And one of them is if you have one Black parent, you're Black.
That's right.
And this is not rational, of course. This is simply
But
the,
if you have a quarter Black parent, you're also Black.
yes.
But
You-
Right.
Have to be.
he
a
also
full-
looks African.
To us, if he were in the Congo, I think they would say he looks white.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah. And
Okay.
in
Right, but-
Brazil, he would be considered mulatto, not
Uh-huh.
black at all. So it depends on where you are, what your race is.
Right, right.
Wow.
Exactly. What you've been, socially programmed to believe is one race versus another.
Mhm.
Okay, this one is more based on the area where I live, but I do ask my students which of these 4 tribes has roots here in the Salinas Valley. And anybody have any guess? Are you familiar with the locations of these
I
tribes?
never heard of those last two. You
Yeah,
know?
the Ohlone are in this area. And the Salinan tribe is in Salinas. I don't know how to pronounce their original name, but
Okay.
the Chumash, some people might know, they're in the Santa Barbara area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard of them.
Okay, of these 4, who had Jewish parents?
Albert Einstein,
Yes,
maybe Elizabeth Taylor.
she
That's
converted
interesting.
to Judaism, but did not have Jewish parents.
Okay.
And Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Johansson,
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson did, and Jesus Christ did, unless you want to take the argument that God was his father.
Maybe God was Jewish. I mean,
About Elizabeth Taylor, I just wanted to share a quick little piece of Baha'i trivia. I don't know if y'all knew Barry Bailey of Las Vegas. She was a quite active Baha'i. And she was a stunt double for Elizabeth Taylor in many movies.
I
Yes.
did not know that.
yes.
You reminded me, though, I read a wonderful book about racism in America. It's called The New Jim Crow, and I would highly recommend it to everybody. It's really about how our prisons are racist. That's really what it's about. And our whole system of incarcerating young Black men is racist, obviously. But I learned that the author, Michelle Alexander, is a Baha'i.
Yeah.
And I had not known that. So again, even more reason to read that book if you haven't. Okay, just a few more here, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Of these different inventions, where do you think they were invented based on the 4 options on the bottom? So where was the wheel, soap, and the sailboat invented? Any
Egypt.
guesses?
Egypt.
Mesopotamia?
Mesopotamia, actually.
What was the question?
Where were the wheel, soap, and sailboats invented?
Mesopotamia. Yeah, this guy said that the Iranians invented chess. I think it was
That is
one of the Baha'is in Manhattan Beach's brother.
Oh, interesting. Well, so my source that I use for this research says India for chess, but there's a lot of there could have been some cultural overlap. Maybe it was the Mughals who were Muslim. I'm not sure. So there might have been some interaction there with Persia. So I've given away the last one. So Hindu, Arabic numerals, and chess, according to my source here, what came from India. What about the nail, the optical lens, and the sundial?
Mesopotamia? Is it
Yeah.
Egypt?
So Egypt, yeah, Egypt
Egypt.
for those. And then China gave us the compass, gunpowder, and paper. And the Egyptians did use papyrus, but that's not quite the same as paper. Oh, here's one that you might find interesting. The United States has had a female acting president. Is that true or false?
False.
Joelle is nodding her head. So you say it's true, Joelle?
I remember hearing that somewhere, but it was a long time ago. Somebody got sick, but I don't remember names.
It wasn't that long ago. It was Joe Biden had to go in for a colonoscopy, and during those several hours, Kamala Harris became the acting president.
Oh.
That's right. That's what I thought.
That's interesting.
And which of the following is considered to be the most culturally respectful term?
I think Hispanic is.
Hispanic now.
Okay, interesting. Well, I might have thought that at one point.
That's true, huh?
I learned I
I
teach at a quote unquote Hispanic serving institution, and about, I would say, 95% of my students are Latinx or whatever term you think is most appropriate. One thing I learned through studying how to better serve this population is that the term Hispanic was actually developed by our federal government to dissociate white people with white Hispanic people. So it was actually a way to segregate. And there used to be schools for people who were Hispanic, versus who were not. In my dissertation, I used the term Caucasian at one point, and I was informed that that itself can be an exclusive term, that it's actually culturally more appropriate to say white than to say Caucasian. So I had to then change some of that programming. But the bottom line with some of this terminology is ask. If you're talking to
Yeah.
a person about their background, ask how they, do they prefer Native American or Indian or, whatever, indigenous or First
These
Nations.
terms are very slippery and they're
Exactly.
constantly moving, so they are not fixed points, and
That's
people
right.
tend to want to call themselves different things at different times. It's
Right.
true, Black people also were at one time insisting to be called colored, and then Negro, and then Black, and then African American, and then people of color, and on and on. So don't feel bad if you get it wrong, because it may have changed the week before.
People are very sensitive to the question. I'm a medical doctor, and a lot of time I want to know the background of the patients that I see, because some diseases are hereditary or more common in some areas. And most often, I would say at least 60–70%, the patient gets very upset. Why are you asking that? So now, before I even ask the question, I say, oh, because this thing could be more common in some cultures and ethnic background and regions. Why? Where are your parents from? Otherwise, they all get very upset.
Yeah,
Well,
they feel like
Go
being,
ahead.
I think sometimes I come across that too, Flor. People think like you are questioning their American identity.
Yes, that is true too.
Mhm. And most of the time when they get that question, they are being, their identity is being challenged. Yeah.
So what I would recommend we discuss with whatever remaining time we have is how we can foster diversity, equity, and inclusion in our communities or in our workplace.
Joelle here, hi. I just wanted to share that just last week, I spoke at the Society of Women Engineers Conference here in Seattle, and my talk was actually about careers in rehabilitation engineering. But I just wanted to share that the future is bright, because there were almost 1,000 women engineers from all over the country, and it was a beautiful flower garden of diversity of every single one of your categories.
Fantastic.
So it was very encouraging.
That is wonderful. Quanta, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I serve in Rotary Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and the Rotary International president made that the focus of her, during her administration. And I got trained as a facilitator in DEI, and so I'm very familiar with it, and I'm glad that it's worked out that you are giving this presentation.
That's
Thank
nice.
you.
Yeah, thank you. It's an important topic.
Yes, his presentation was the direct intervention of the Holy Spirit, obviously, since it was not planned and it just happened. And we're very grateful that it happened. But promoting diversity and inclusion is a matter of first being aware of the need for it, and even being able to see where it is and where it isn't. So this kind of raising of awareness is the first step. Otherwise, most people without some education will not even see a problem if they're not one of the minority categories.
I'm glad You raised that point. Another book I've read that I would recommend to everybody, if you haven't read it, is White Fragility by
Mhm.
Robin DiAngelo. And it was eye-opening for me to read it, even though I try to be aware of my own, biases and privilege and so forth. Another thing I can recommend for everybody is the implicit association test that Harvard makes available for free. And it has different versions. One of them is on race. Has anyone done that before? The implicit association test? So Joelle has done it. Again, you could do it online for free. And what it does is it shows you different images. For example, images of people with darker skin or lighter skin, and it'll show positive and negative terms. And it measures how long it takes your brain to associate, for example, a person with darker skin with a positive term compared to a person with lighter skin. And that difference in brain processing time it uses to figure out if you have a bias. And when I took it, I'd learned I do have a bias towards people of lighter skin. And I didn't want that to be the answer, but knowing that then helps me realize that though I was raised as a Baha'i and I've always tried to be, a world citizen, we're impacted by the society around us. So
Yeah,
that's something I could recommend.
I'm sure that everybody in the society has a bias towards lighter skin, including people with darker skin. And how could you not? I mean, every image you see on television or on billboards or in movies and so on associates white people with positive, I mean, for the most part, the positive images are of whites and the negative images are of black.
Yeah, I think the test said that I was in like the 70% majority. So there might be a few who have a bias against those with light skin, which I wouldn't blame somebody for having that bias. I see Janus has raised her hand as well.
Yeah, as for promoting the DI, I was thinking, especially based on your last question, is that how important the role of communication and interaction is, allowing people to interact with one another, talk to each other, because they could inadvertently be disrespectful to somebody without even realizing, which background, for example, they're from. But when you're communicating, when you're interacting, certain barriers come down. You start sort of not seeing the color or the race or the language or accent or whatever. You just see the person gradually.
I agree. The more we associate with people different from us, the more we realize how much we have in common and how much we can learn from one another. So we could all look for those opportunities.
I think we also have to learn different skills. One size does not fit all. You have to learn the skills of interacting with women as opposed to men, with blacks as opposed to whites, with people with disabilities as opposed to those who don't have them. There are distinct behaviors which are necessary and important and valuable. So it's a matter of learning as well.
We have Judith raised her hand. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm joining you from Southern Ontario, and I just want to share my experience. So I was born in the Netherlands, but I was raised in Canada. And after I studied, I went overseas. And I was actually overseas for almost 30 years in different countries. Met the Baha'i faith in Amsterdam. But when I came back to Canada, I found it really interesting that my children, they started school in Bulgaria, but then they entered the school system in Canada, in Ontario. And I realized that so much work had been done in the school system on learning how to integrate different cultures. It was really incredible. Like, you know, the school system in Canada compared to Bulgaria, it's not as good in terms of the kind of level of education, science and math and so on. But in terms of citizenship, teaching children how to work together, how to, to really accept each other as normal friends. It's really incredible.
That's great.
Yeah, we should follow Canada's model here in the United States.
Yeah. Well, some places do.
Yes, we have a lot of work to do with Indigenous people and not, a lot of areas.
Yeah. Well, in Manhattan, excuse me, in Manhattan Beach, which is an all-white suburb of Los Angeles, this is a very hot political issue as well. They're just now beginning to include DEI education in the schools, the courses in ethnic history and diversity. Actually, they're not even in the school yet. They're working on it. I'm trying to figure out what the courses should be. And it's already politically very controversial. In the last election, it was a very hot topic of people who were against this and thought it was indoctrination and that it was brainwashing and so on. So there is, we're not anywhere close to, at least in Manhattan Beach, to the target of being aware of these things. But then if you live in an all-white community, you don't have to be aware of these things because you never encounter a problem. I mean, you don't have to be racist because everybody's white. So what, who are you being racist against? So these are social problems which are very current and very controversial, actually.
But there is always the one person in that all-white society that is not white and is suffering, but they don't count.
Well, the one person has to be aware of it. Nobody else has to worry. I mean, they just are oblivious to any need for racial sensitivity because they just don't see people of different races. That's all.
In the interest of diversity, maybe we can ask for those who've not spoken up with any thoughts or questions to take this opportunity to do so, and we can give them some space. So if there's someone who hasn't asked a question or made a comment, I would encourage you now to do so.
I'd like to say something. My name is Helen from Northern Ontario in Canada, and we have quite a large Indigenous population here. And in my experience with my Indigenous friends, I have to say that I've learned that being well-meaning is not enough. Sometimes we think we are saying the right thing, we are behaving in the right way, our tone of voice and everything, and we miss the mark. And I'm going to give you an example. When we had a function here with our young people, young Baha'i people, one of the Indigenous girls just spontaneously began to do a native dance. And people came out with their cameras and began to flash pictures. And I was standing beside my Indigenous friend, and she wouldn't talk to me. She was very focused on what was going on, and she was moving. She was moving to the music and the beat. And she told me afterwards that it was just so disrespectful to treat this as a spectacle and as a photo opportunity. And yet people were complimentary, were excited, were well-meaning. And it just goes to show you how, you know, in this case, it's not just enough to think we're doing the right thing. We really need to engage in meaningful, ongoing conversations with our friends who are diverse, and more than one conversation and more than one deepening, and it needs to be ongoing. And it's something, as it's not just a question of job opportunity or work opportunities. It's a question of everyday communication with our friends who are different from us, who have different color. And so to engage in these conversations continuously with them, because we do have a very long way to go. And that's just one example I can give you where we thought we were being well-meaning, or I thought I was being well-meaning, and you know, having a tendency to talk too loud, having a tendency to become a little bit impatient, to finish someone's sentences, and even something as simple as giving them time to express themselves. And we have learned that as a Baha'i community here, that when we are in our meetings and we are consulting, as long as it takes, we don't cut anyone off or become aware of time frames. So I just want to add that you know, it's being well-meaning is a start, but it's in constant dialogue, loving friendships, reaching out, asking questions, discussing, you know, literally walking in their shoes with them, where we develop this true sensitivity and respect for and oneness with our friends who are not the same color as us.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Helen. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm Kathy Knight, and I grew up. I had a really wonderful experience in my childhood. My grandmother lived in Oklahoma City, where we're from, and she was on the board of the local girls club. I forget what the actual name of it was, and there were some young colored girls that wanted to come join the group and come to their activities, and people said no. And she says no, these colored girls are just as good as the white girls, and they're going to be part of it. And so she got it integrated. And then my mother came to Los Angeles, and even back there in Oklahoma before that, she started birth control clinics, was on the boards, and she said we've got to give access to birth control to all levels, of society, and we're going to do that. And she worked really, really hard on setting up one here in Venice, and it just gave me a really good background and a good feeling my whole life. I'm just saying that these kinds of things children pick up on, and it just gave me a good feeling my whole life, and extended my whole life to being, more open and respectful of all different parts of society. Mm-hmm. So it's a very good impact on children. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a new person, Jean Stewart, and I don't think I have seen you before. Do you have any comments? Welcome first.
Jean is a friend of mine from Rotary. I invited him. I don't know if he likes to say anything.
Oh, okay. Well,
I think Joe raised his hand as well.
Yes, I would like to just back up Tony's comment about if you're all the same, there's nobody to be racist against. And that's rather how I grew up in an elementary school, when there was one black person who I never even met. racism was a very foreign term for me.
Judith posed a very interesting question here. Judith, do you want to ask it over your microphone?
Yeah, sure. So I'm in the field of community development, and this is actually a question that I have is, when I see positions for a person who's interested and knows something about, we call it EDI here, but DEI, could I apply? I think as a Baha'i, I would have a lot to offer, but on the other hand, I feel that it might be better to stand back and let someone of color or just different experience than I have to take that position. And I would love to hear what other people think.
Is it guaranteed that there would be a person of a different color who would take the position? Or could it just be somebody else who is
Another white person.
another white person? I mean, I can see if you were both nominated for the job and you both, and then you wanted to say to whoever's making the decision, I would like to defer to somebody of color because I think they would have a different experience. But just standing back is not necessarily going to get you where you want to be. So
That's true.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I would think applying shows an interest, and then it's up to the organization to decide who's the appropriate party.
right.
And something I've reflected on recently is I'm generally considered white, but there was a time when my ancestors would not have been considered white. My mother's side of the family is Jewish, and there was a time when Jewish people were not considered white in America. On my dad's side of the family are Irish, ancestors, and they weren't considered white. Italians were not considered white.
Yeah,
So,
especially Irish were considered black, actually, or maybe one step below blacks. They were horribly discriminated against in the 19th and early 20th century. But again, race is socially constructed. I mean, when I teach courses on race, I make it an important point that race depends on the time and history we're talking about. It depends on location. It depends on self-identification and so on. It's a very complicated category. And people who were Black at one point, and this is also true of when you cross borders, of course, but people who were Black at one point are now considered white.
While we're waiting for the next question, I just want to let you know that we will have the meeting next week, and hopefully we will get some information about whereabouts of Ishmael. We know that he recently moved from England to Mexico, so I'm not sure what happened. So hopefully we can find him. So please make sure you look at my emails. If we may have to cancel it if we cannot locate him. For those of you that live in Southern California, we're going to have an in-person Rizwan celebration on Sunday, April 30th. And we're going to have musicians and speakers and a lot of food. And please do come and bring all your friends with you. So that is on April 30th at 11 a.m. And for May, we have an in-person art and dialogue at our house on the second Saturday in May, which is the 13th. And then we're going to have 2 Zoom sessions with Dr. Mujan Momen from England. So we're going to have a busy schedule, and I'm very, very grateful for Trav to be here, for Dr. Williams
Yes.
to be here for one thing, and to be willing to share his slides and his talk with us. Are there any other questions, comments? Well, if not, I think we'll, you can all unmute yourselves and clap.
Clap for Trav for saving the day.
Really did save the day.